Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into a deeply fascinating and honestly a little unsettling thought experiment from our source material. We are looking at a speculative future, a future where America actually abandons its original moral foundation and is instead run entirely by algorithms and administrative mechanisms. It's a reality that strips away our moral agency for the sake of collective efficiency, basically treating the whole country not as a union of citizens, but like, well, a giant operating system. So, what actually happens when a nation replaces moral judgment with machine governance? Let's picture that exact society for a second. What happens when administrative necessity and systemic efficiency just completely override the consent of the governed? Our sources paint a pretty stark picture here. They describe a scenario where human moral judgment is phased out, and this cold, calculating machine governance steps in to manage the population. Just listen to how our analysis frames this. A future where the foundation is not a moral claim about human beings, but a mechanism to be redesigned. Think about that. Instead of a country built on the idea that humans have inherent worth, with strict boundaries the state just cannot cross, imagine the society treated like a massive, complex math equation. It's a chilling vision of an engineered society, one that treats the nation as just a giant optimization problem to be solved, which is a wild contrast to the original blueprint of the United States. To really grasp what's lost in that speculative future, we have to rewind all the way back to 1776. And our source material helps us do this by introducing a modern-day guy named Kevin. Now, Kevin isn't a politician. He's just an everyday citizen trying to stay grounded. And to do that, he keeps a copy of Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence right on his desk. For him, it's an anchor connecting him to the nation's origins. For Kevin, that document isn't just historical decoration. He sees it as the absolute moral architecture of what our sources call a republic of ends. Now, this is an absolutely crucial concept. In a republic of ends, the ends, meaning the ultimate final goals, are the individual, unalienable rights of the people. The government, it's just the means created to protect those ends. It's a profound moral project, not just a cold system of rules. And this architecture actually relies on three fixed stars pulled straight from the text of the Declaration itself. First, human equality, the premise that all individuals are created equal. Second, unalienable rights, rights endowed by a creator that absolutely cannot be surrendered or taken away by anyone. And third, the role of government, which acts solely as a mechanism instituted to secure those specific rights, and nothing more. But here's the catch. As Kevin listens to modern political discourse, he notices a specific phrase creeping in. A phrase that honestly sends a chill down his spine. The promise to fundamentally change America. Now, to some, that might sound like progress, but to someone anchored in that original architecture, it signals something entirely different. The real realization Kevin has is about the grammar of that phrase. As the source text argues, you do not fundamentally change something whose foundation is moral. You either uphold it or you abandon it. It's a huge distinction. If the foundation of the country is a moral doctrine about human rights, then a fundamental change isn't just a policy tweak, like, say, a new tax rate. It is, at its absolute core, a shift in legitimacy itself. Section 1. The Party of Mechanisms and the Rise of the Engineers. This perfectly brings us to a modern political philosophy that our text identifies as the Party of Mechanisms, or the Rise of the Engineers. This perspective, which the source neutrally observes growing in modern governance, basically views society's challenges as engineering problems. They aren't looking at issues of moral judgment. They're looking at systems that need redesigning and populations that need managing. The source outlines 4 specific tools these engineers use. It starts with creating new federal structures to deeply centralize authority, then expanding administrative authorities through huge, non-elected bureaucracies. Next, they implement top-down national standards to force uniformity. And finally, they increasingly rely on algorithmic tools, think automated risk assessments and data-driven behavioral nudges, to manage society at a massive, completely impersonal scale. Proponents of this mechanistic approach will tell you they are simply optimizing society. They want to deliver efficient, predictable outcomes instead of relying on the messy, unpredictable virtue of millions of citizens. But critics? They warn this approach is incredibly dangerous. Why? Well, because it relies on mechanisms as substitutes for individual virtue and moral judgment, rather than what they were always intended to be, safeguards for our rights. Section 2. The Quiet Philosophical Shift. You see, this transition from a republic of ends to a machine-managed society doesn't happen overnight with some dramatic takeover. It happens subtly, right in the vocabulary we use every single day.
And Kevin starts noticing this linguistic shift everywhere. We're moving away from the human-centric language of the founders, words like unalienable rights and consent of the governed, and replacing it with the clinical language of population management, collective priorities, needs, and administrative necessity.
Furthermore, instead of relying on accountable judgment, the focus shifts heavily to systemic management. The individual is no longer treated as a moral agent whose boundaries must be protected against the state. Instead, they become a data point, literally just a cog in a collective system to be managed from the top down for peak efficiency. The text emphasizes a really important distinction here. This shift isn't necessarily overt malicious tyranny. It's not cartoon villains plotting in a dark room. Instead, it's drift. It's a slow, quiet, almost imperceptible philosophical drift away from the core founding principles. And according to the source, this well-intentioned but insidious drift is exactly the kind of threat the founders feared the absolute most. This realization gives Kevin a massive aha moment of absolute clarity while he's looking over the Declaration of Independence. He pauses on a phrase he's probably read 1,000 times, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, the source argues that destructive here doesn't just mean a government has become outdated or inefficient or in need of technical reform. It means abandoning the original rights that the government was explicitly created to secure in the first place. If fundamental change actually means a moral change to the foundation, then this drift is literally destructive to those ends, which ultimately threatens the nation's very legitimacy. And that brings this explainer to a crucial, powerful resolution based on the text. The United States is not a machine. It is a moral project. The nation's legitimacy doesn't come from its ability to endlessly redesign its systems or perfectly guide its population through algorithms. Its legitimacy comes solely from remaining faithful to its original moral ends. So I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. Based on the speculative future we've explored today, if we fully embrace a future of algorithmic, machine-managed governance that treats our moral foundation as entirely optional, does the American project lose its very right to exist? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep asking these big questions.